Match of the day on Saturday with 2 First Division games. For now, good night.
For decades, football fans heard his voice. They trusted it. They welcomed it into their homes every weekend. Tony Gubba was there for some of the biggest moments in British sport. World Cups, Match of the Day, Grandstand, Olympic Games. For more than 40 years, he stood among the most respected broadcasters in the country. Yet today, his name is rarely mentioned alongside the giants of his era. John Motson, Brian Moore, Barry Davies. Those names became part of football history. Tony Gubba slowly disappeared into it. And that is where the sadness begins. Because the people who worked with him knew exactly how good he was. The broadcaster respected him. The journalist admired him. The viewers trusted him. But somehow, one of the most familiar voices in football became one of its most forgotten. Not because he failed. Not because he lacked talent. But because he spent a lifetime serving the game instead of promoting himself. While others became legends in the spotlight, Tony Gubba remained in the background, quietly doing his job, quietly earning respect, and quietly fading from public memory. A voice heard by millions. A career spanning generations. Yet a legacy that never received the recognition many believe it deserved. This is the story of Tony Gubba, the voice football slowly buried in silence. Subscribe for more forgotten football legends. Long before football fans knew his voice, Tony Gubba was chasing a career in journalism. He was born in Manchester in 1943 and started out in newspapers. Like many great broadcasters of his era, he learned the profession from the ground up, writing stories, meeting people, asking questions. Eventually, he joined the Daily Mirror. But the world of television was growing fast, and new opportunities were appearing. Gubba made the move into broadcasting with Southern Television. It proved to be a turning point. His calm style and professionalism quickly stood out. In 1969, he joined the BBC. At the time, few could have imagined what would follow. Over the next few years, he steadily climbed through the ranks. Not through controversy, not through self-promotion, but through hard work and consistency. The BBC trusted him with bigger assignments, bigger events, and bigger responsibilities. Without making much noise, Tony Gubba was becoming one of the most dependable figures in British sports broadcasting, and the best years of his career were still ahead of him. By the 1970s, Tony Gubba was becoming a familiar face on British television. The BBC saw something valuable in him. He could report, he could present, and he could handle pressure without seeking attention. That made him different. While some broadcasters became known for big personalities, Gubba built his reputation on professionalism. Year after year, the BBC trusted him with major events, and he rarely disappointed. His role continued to grow. He worked on Sports Night, Grandstand, and eventually Match of the Day.
Lee. Oh, what a goal!
For many viewers, Tony Gubba became a regular part of their sporting weekends. But football was only one part of his story. Unlike most broadcasters, he could cover almost anything: Olympics, athletics, cycling, tennis, winter sports. Whatever the event, producers knew he would be prepared. That versatility became one of his greatest strengths, yet it would later become one of the reasons his achievements were often overlooked. Because while others became associated with one sport, Tony Gubba seemed to be everywhere, always working, always delivering, always reliable. As the years passed, he became one of the most trusted broadcasters in British sport. But the respect he earned behind the scenes was not always matched by public recognition, and that would become a recurring theme throughout his career. By the 1980s, Tony Gubba had become one of the most experienced broadcasters in British sport. But he faced a challenge few people noticed. He was working in an era filled with legendary names: John Motson, Barry Davies, Brian Moore, David Coleman. These were the voices that dominated headlines and football memories, and deservedly so. But standing just behind them was Tony Gubba, a broadcaster every bit as professional, every bit as respected, yet rarely given the same attention. That was the strange reality of his career. The BBC trusted him with major events. Fans heard him regularly. Colleagues admired his work. But when football supporters looked back on that era, his name was often mentioned later, or sometimes not at all. Not because he lacked ability. Quite the opposite. Many believed his consistency became his biggest disadvantage. People expected quality from Tony Gubba. He delivered it so often that it almost became normal. There were no headlines about reliability, No awards for quietly doing the job right year after year. There was only the work. And Tony Gubba never stopped doing it. While others became symbols of an era, he became the dependable voice in the background, trusted by millions, remembered by too few. And over time, that quiet reality slowly followed him throughout his career. Most broadcasters become known for one sport. Tony Gubba became known for many. That was both his strength and his problem. While others built their reputations around a single role, Gubba seemed to be everywhere. One week it was football. The next it was the Olympics. Then another major sporting event. The BBC valued that versatility. It made him one of the most useful broadcasters in the industry. But it also meant he never became attached to one defining identity. Many fans knew his voice. Far fewer realised just how much sport he had covered. That is what makes his career so unusual. The more valuable he became, the easier it was for people to overlook what he was achieving. While others became famous for one thing, Tony Gubba quietly became good at almost everything. And despite decades of outstanding work, the recognition never quite matched the contribution. By the 2000s, Tony Gubba had already spent decades in sports broadcasting. His reputation was secure. His experience was unquestioned. But then came an unexpected opportunity: Dancing on Ice. For a new generation of viewers, this became their introduction to Tony Gubba. After years covering major sporting events, he suddenly found himself part of one of Britain's most popular television shows. And surprisingly, it worked. His knowledge of skating and calm broadcasting style made him a natural fit. Many viewers enjoyed his commentary. Others discovered him for the very first time. But there was a strange twist. While the show brought him fresh recognition, it also changed how some people remembered him. Younger audiences often knew him from Dancing on Ice, rather than the decades he had spent covering football and other major sports. The broadcaster who had dedicated his life to sport was now becoming known for something completely different, and few could have known that this chapter would be among the last of his remarkable career. By 2013, Tony Gubba had spent more than 4 decades in broadcasting. Few people had covered as much sport. Few had earned as much respect from colleagues. Yet his career was approaching its end. Gubba had been battling leukemia. Despite his illness, many viewers remained unaware of how serious his condition had become. Then came the news that shocked the broadcasting world. Tony Gubba had passed away at the age of 69. Tributes quickly arrived from across British sport and television. Colleagues spoke of his professionalism. Friends remembered his kindness. Broadcasters praised the standards he had set throughout his career. For those who knew him, the loss was deeply felt, not simply because of what he had achieved, but because of the person he was. A trusted colleague, a respected journalist, and a voice that had accompanied generations of sports fans. After a lifetime spent covering other people's stories, Tony Gubba's own story had come to an end. But the question remained: had football truly given him the recognition he deserved? Time has a way of deciding who gets remembered, and who slowly fades from view. For Tony Gubba, that process happened quietly. His work never disappeared. Football fans still watch the matches he covered. They still celebrate the tournaments he reported on. They still revisit moments from an era he helped bring to life. But his name is rarely part of those conversations. That is what makes his legacy so unusual. On doing the job well, year after year, perhaps that is why he became so easy to overlook. The memories remained, the moments remained, but the man behind them slowly slipped into the background. And as football moved into a new generation, one of its most familiar voices became one of its least discussed. Not forgotten by everyone, but remembered far less than many believe he deserved. Perhaps that was the saddest part of Tony Gubba's story. Not the illness, not the passing of time, but how quietly one of football's most trusted voices faded from public memory. For decades he had been there, covering the matches, telling the stories, helping millions of fans experience the game they loved. After his passing, John Motson said, "He was probably the best reporter I ever worked with." Coming from one of football's most respected commentators, there could hardly be greater praise. And perhaps that tells us everything. Not because Tony Gubba lacked greatness, but because greatness does not always receive the recognition it deserves. While others became symbols of an era, Tony Gubba became one of its hidden gems, a broadcaster trusted by millions, respected by his peers, and remembered warmly by those who knew the profession best. Perhaps that is the real reason Tony Gubba was buried in silence. Not because football rejected him, but because football moved on too quickly from one of its most dependable voices. Yet for those who remember football's golden years, his voice still belongs there. Among the greats, among the memories, and among the forgotten legends who helped shape the game we love. Subscribe for more forgotten football legends.